So I just wanted to say to everybody that's already online, welcome. I'm Juanita Cox. I'm a trustee on the board of the Oral History Society, convener of their Migration SIG. I'm also a research fellow at the Institute of Historical Research. And today I have the pleasure of chairing the In Dialogue event. So just as a reminder, the event is being recorded. So if you don't want to be visible, please make sure that you turn off your videos or keep them turned off. I know some people will be thinking of doing screenshots, so that's just for your information. The In Dialogue Society has been holding In Dialogue events, the Oral History Society has been holding In Dialogue events since 2022 with Black and minority organizations. So far this year, we've been in dialogue with the Young Historians Project, with the African Caribbean Achievement Project, and also with, Abigail Bernard, who was an independent oral historian who'd been documenting experiences of Black nurses and who also spoke about the project. She's currently working on the Black Frontline, but we also spoke to Louise Ryan, senior professor of sociology at the London Metropolitan University, and she spoke of her experiences of working on the Irish nurses in the NHS Oral History Project. So the aim of the dialogues is for a mutual sharing of interest and experience in the doing of oral history, researching the past through the memories of people who lived it. The idea and commitment to dialogue follows from the Oral History Society's determination to acquire greater awareness and appreciation of Black and minority ethnic history, involving critical reflection and greater inclusivity in terms of the Society's organization, practice, and publications. In this endeavor, the Oral History Society is grateful to the Institute of Historical Research for its continued support on each occasion. We're delighted that for this fourth event, we're in dialogue with Kadija, Ullah, Sonbal, Khokhar, and Claire Fox of the Ahmed, Iqbal, Ullah Education Trust. The Trust is a specialist open access library and archive, focusing on the study of race, migration, and thinking about race, anti-racist activism, and the fight for social justice. They're recognized also as a center of excellence in oral history work, global majority, community-led collecting, and ethical community engagement. And so what I'm going to do now, before we start, I just want to give an introduction to Kadija, Sonbal, and also Claire, and also to the discussant today, who is Jennie Vickers. So I know both Kadija and Sonbal began their roles as collections assistants in January 2020 as archive trainees on the Coming In From the Cold project. Both completed a certificate in archives and records management, but since progressing on to the role of collections assistant, Kadija has focused on digital engagement, while Sonbal has focused on aspects of digitization. A large part of Kadija's role is to promote collections using digital and social media platforms, as well as curating material for the digital exhibition space that they have. She's passionate about preserving the crucial histories they hold and using the collections to find new creative ways of sharing important stories that are not told to wider audiences. Sonbal's role consists of acquiring, documenting, managing, and making all the rich material in their collections accessible. Working as part of an organization that aims to increase visibility and representation of stories from global majority communities is something she's always felt strongly drawn towards. They will be joined by Claire Fox, who is the academic director, senior lecturer in criminology at the University of Manchester. And then, as I said, we will have all three members of the centre in discussion with Jennie Vickers, who is also an Oral History Society trustee. But when she's not being a trustee, Jennie is a visual artist and interested in the ways that personal and collective memories are represented. She works mainly in textiles, making quilts, and has worked in permanent collections at Sheffield Museums Trust, the Whitworth, and the V&A. Alongside her art practice, she has worked in learning and engagement roles in museums and archives for over 20 years. This includes 10 years off and on at the Ahmed, Iqbal, Ullah Education Trust, where she managed a range of oral history projects. To address the underrepresentation of the global majority histories in archive collections across the Northwest, she then researched, developed, and managed the Coming In From the Cold project. She now manages the creative learning team at Touchstones Museum in Rochdale, developing programs for schools, young people, and their families. With contributions from the audience, we expect the dialogue to last just under an hour and a half. But I'd now like to hand over to the team at the Ahmed, Iqbal, Ullah Trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If you just bear with me, I'm just going to share the screen. Can we all see that? Okay. Excellent. Yes. So thank you so much for the invite today. They say never to start your presentation with an apology, but I've never been one for rules, really. So let me apologise in advance. I have so many pets and children running around in my household that the probability of being interrupted at some point is fairly high. So just to give you an idea of the structure of our talk today, we're going to start by giving you an overview of the Centre and the Trust, and also talk a little bit about the work we do and who we work with. Sonbal will then talk about our collecting work in more detail, drawing on the example of the Kashmiri Lives project. Kadija will also then move on to talking about the different ways that we share our collections and how they can be accessed. Before Sonbal concludes the presentation by highlighting some of the very important challenges that are faced when working with these kinds of collections. And obviously, we're very much looking forward to hearing from Jennie and answering questions from the other attendees as well. So the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Centre was established in 1999. It is, as Juanita said, a prominent and sector-leading library and archive specialising in topics relating to race, ethnicity and migration. We have a particular focus on the experiences of global majority people, and we are part of the University of Manchester, so our rich and growing resources actually form part of the university's special collections. The centre also operates in conjunction with the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Education Trust, which was established in 2001. It's a registered charity that's governed by a board of trustees. The Education Trust serves as an outreach arm, if you like, of the centre, and is responsible for leading on various educational projects, public events, community heritage support programmes. Both the centre and the trust are situated in a rather wonderful location of Manchester's Central Library. And our work, as you might be able to tell by this diagram, is underpinned by relationships with Manchester City Council, the University of Manchester, Archives Plus, as well as various other external funding bodies. So the Race Centre and Trust are named in honour of Ahmed Iqbal Ullah. Ahmed was a young boy of Bangladeshi heritage who lost his life in 1986 when he was only 13 years of age. This was a racially motivated attack by a fellow student that took place on the grounds of his high school in Manchester. In the aftermath of Ahmed's death, the investigations and reviews that immediately followed were poorly handled by the authorities involved. And it was only in the wake of a very determined and courageous campaign led by Ahmed's family, supported by anti-racist activists and by numerous residents of Greater Manchester and indeed beyond that, that the City Council initiated an inquiry into Ahmed's death. The resulting report, known as the MacDonald Report, although initially suppressed, was finally published in 1988 and unequivocally affirmed the very significant role that race played in Ahmed's murder. And we do have, of course, an archive documenting the legacy of Ahmed's story, which we can pop a link to in the chat. So what do we do? Well, as a socially engaged organisation, we do have very clear mission and vision that have very much driven the formulation of our core values and guiding principles, which shape the way that we work. These include collaborative engagement. So we very much believe in collaborative and respectful interactions. Our approach is centered on working with people rather than doing things to people. We, of course, champion equity. We're very proactive in taking a stance in challenging inequality, discrimination, and bias. And we're also concerned with preserving marginalised histories. We undertake the tasks of uncovering, recording, and collecting the histories of global majority communities, and work to provide a safe and inclusive space for open discussions. So at our core, we are dedicated to archiving the life stories of global majority communities in Manchester. And we do this through various means, including offering educational support, which is where we will assist schools and educators in developing anti-racist curricula, through creation of various resources that highlight Black history. And these will be suitable for both school and community contexts. We're also involved in knowledge sharing through the events we organise, our exhibitions, and other activities that share the invaluable contributions of global majority communities to local and national British history. It is very important to us that our archives are accessible. So we do work towards making the outcomes of most of the community and school-based projects readily available for visitors to explore, certainly at the centre, but increasingly online as well, which Kadija will talk more about in a moment. Finally, one of the most valued parts of our work is our community collaborations. We collaborate very closely with a whole range of global majority community groups to collect life histories, photographs, documents, ensuring that these very rich histories are preserved and then shared for the benefit of others. I'm now going to hand over to Sonbal, who will talk in more detail about our collecting work.
Thank you, Claire. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So as Claire said earlier, our archives and oral histories document the stories of Greater Manchester's global majority communities. And I've written down a huge list of the different types of media that we hold in our archives. And at the end, we have a lot of oral histories, which we'll talk about more today. And you can see that the stories show personal and community resistance, resourcefulness, and activism, and can be broken down into, well, mainly these four categories: community organizations, community issues and events, anti-racist activism, and again, life stories and oral histories of individuals. So we hold collections of national importance, as you can see, the Institute of Race Relations newspaper collection there, to more local history. So we have Exploring Our Roots. You see a picture of Eloise Edwards there, who was very important in local activism within Moss Side, and Gods of Babylon, which is a newer oral history life story of individuals living, of Kurdish community individuals living in Manchester. And in terms of the dates that the material spans, so the earliest, I think we have archives from the 1960s. We have digitized photos from the 1940s from the Pan-African Congress in Manchester. So that's one of the earliest. And we have a lot of, obviously, our oral histories, which are modern history. Yeah, next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about coming in from the cold as an example of how we work directly with global majority groups. We currently have funding from HLF. I think it's Heritage Lottery Fund. I know they changed their name to NLHF quite a lot too. So we have this funding to continue the work that we do at the centre. Officially since 2017, the Coming In From the Cold project outlines and aims to support global majority community groups in Manchester to develop their own heritage projects and develop archive collections out of those projects. And these are often in the form of oral history collections or more widely project research. And this project was a direct response to an audit that was taken in 2017, 2018, that showed that there were huge gaps within Greater Manchester's archives and collections relating directly to these histories. And so to note that a lot of the archives that are a result of the projects that we work with aren't always deposited with us, because we also support donation of these archives and these projects to other organizations, or we also encourage organizations to keep archives in-house, and we provide the support in order to, and the training in order for them to do this. But initially, the project is about promoting the importance of documenting global majority British heritage and making that visible wherever and however that's appropriate. So the coming of the project and all of the processes involved, we strive to make them community-led, and to go more into this idea of community-led collecting, which later on I will explain with my case study. The practices of community-led collecting really underpin how the Centre and the Trust work with our communities, and how we want to continually reflect and respond to the needs of each community as they identify it themselves, and that we understand that they're all unique. So as an example, we help groups to identify and set their own themes and topics and collecting remit for their projects, rather than us as an institution directly setting that agenda for them. We provide project participants to gain transferable skills through oral history training, and essentially the project groups themselves apply for and retain all control of their project budgets with very minimal input around that from us. Next slide, please. So I'm going to try and cut this down because this part can get really long, but I want to talk about our model of working widely for the Coming In From the Cold project. So this model of working, a note to make is the sequence of this isn't always sequential, essentially. It changes according to what the needs of the project group are. So some projects might work with us or get in touch with us halfway through this process. Some might be with us from right at the beginning to right at the end. Mostly, when we get initial ideas for heritage projects, we will direct them to funders, relevant funders that may be HLF or otherwise. And at the same time, we will be offering advice and comments on how to develop their funding applications. And also to outline what levels of support we can offer them. So at this point, we may mention archiving. If they want one of their outputs to be an archive, we will ask them to build in associated times and costs into their funding to be able to provide that support. If an archive is not the focus of the project, then we also provide training, publicity, and further advice in hopes that a further project might result in an archive material. Again, not that may be deposited elsewhere. And again, at the same time, our community producer and community archivist will write support letters for funding. So once a group's received their funding, at this point, we will offer facilitation support. So this is mainly oral history training. And I'll talk more again about oral history training and what that consists of, but it's usually around oral history interviewing, documentation that's associated with it, basic archiving and reminiscence and such. And again, we support we facilitate other support. So we will help with their events, delivering a few of their projects, promoting their activities. We may source volunteers for them. We also loan equipment like oral history recorders, because we know a lot of these project groups may have difficulty in building and funding for that. And again, this will be the point where a lot of groups may come to us after having received their funding. And then after that, we will prepare for the archiving. And so the digital and physical material will be appraised by our archivists. And and we will accession them. Conservation checks are done of digital items, and conservation checks will be done of physical items as well. And then at this point, the archivist and the project coordinator would have a back and forth around the donation agreement. And I consider this to be one of the most important parts of this process, not for me personally in my role, because I'm so deep into donation agreements and documentation, but the project coordinator will list all the material and the corresponding copyrights associated with that. So in terms of community-led collecting and being inclusive in that process, a huge part of this is having a dialogue with project coordinators to really fine-tune what they give copyright over to us. So we'll have a conditions of use form as well. At this point, we will also have loads of conversations about contextual information that may be added to the catalogue, descriptions of photographs, of people, of places, and that's really useful. That's really useful for the cataloging process. And also producing indexes and summaries of their oral histories, if they have any, and ensuring that that is accurate to be made into a bound copy for promotion. So again, talking more about the cataloging process, the way we catalog essentially allows community coordinators to bring their community knowledge and expertise to the cataloging process. So we'll allow people to describe and identify themselves through whatever language they seem most comfortable with. Again, they'll add contextual information regarding events and traditions, and we follow their lead throughout this cataloging process. We'll also honor cultural and religious sensitivities, and I'll discuss that again later in detail about sensitivity reviews and so on. But essentially, we challenge the assumption that everyone that we work with understands basic archival and oral history training terminology, which is an assumption that we make because we're oral history practitioners and archivists and working in this role. But a lot of the work that we do at this stage is breaking down inaccessible archival language and legal jargon that's used in documentations in order to have that transparency between the relationship as us as archive and project coordinators. And then after archiving, cataloging, the digital outputs or other outputs are sort of created. And so we support groups in that if they want to develop a digital exhibition, we have the space for it. Again, Kadija is going to touch on that. If they need any technical help in terms of editing videos or sound excerpts or help on narrative structures for exhibitions, we will also help with that. And we will promote the archive and the catalogue online and through other various platforms that we have. And this whole process sort of comes to that endpoint, which is on the right, where through the development of exhibitions, all the publications, articles, the conference papers, places, settings like this, blogs, we use all of these existing archives to encourage more project-based collecting with communities. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about Kashmiri lives as a sort of mirror to that model of working. So the project Kashmiri Lives was developed by Rochdale's Crescent Community Radio with the aim to record the heritage of the Kashmiri community within Rochdale at the risk of being overlooked and forgotten. So the project was initially started between Parveen Bibi, who's a broadcast journalist, and Shams Rahman, who's a research assistant at the University of Manchester. And they were researching a documentary about Kashmiris in Greater Manchester with the intent to learn more about their own Kashmiri heritage. And in 2017, they connected with Crescent Community Radio in Rochdale, and they made a successful application to HLF for a year-long project to gather and share all of these valuable stories. The reason they decided to to link up with Crescent Community Radio in Rochdale is because today there is an estimated 80,000 Kashmiris living in the region of Rochdale. And so the oral histories that they eventually collected contain stories as told and lived by 3 generations of Kashmiris. I think they're aged from 19 to 101, so it's a vast age range and stories within that itself. And the project is really a record of their lived experiences and covers many topics such as migration, identity, culture, and histories and memories that developed alongside the creation of the Kashmiri community in Greater Manchester. So once they got their funding and had their project outlined, they recruited 10 volunteers, and it was at this point that they were linked to us at the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Centre and Education Trust to receive oral history training. The oral history training is a huge part of the support that we offer these community groups, and it is a really big chunky piece of training with a lot of information that we try to get across, but again try to make that accessible knowledge rather than information dumping onto our groups and volunteers. But it includes stuff like what is oral history. Explaining that concept itself is such an important part of training. Oral history techniques, researching, booking interviewees, what interviewing techniques are, editing audios, managing those audio archives, using various types of recording equipment, transcribing, indexing, and etc. It's a lot. So once they recorded their interviewees, the interviews with the community members, they eventually donated the archive to us. And many of the themes that sort of came up across all of the 29 interviews were themes of education, language, racial prejudice, Kashmiri political activism. All of these themes emerged. And you had a lot of topics around political organizations that were striving towards Kashmiri liberation across all the different interviews, across all generations, which is really interesting. And because of this, I think some of the interviews were anonymized in order to protect identity and places of residence and such. So some of the information is redacted. We do have closures on some of those interviews. Some of the interviewees have stated that they don't want their interview shared on social media, or they don't want them in exhibitions. So that is something that we really had to take into consideration with cataloging. And another point in terms of cataloging is that all the 29 interviews were recorded in the interviewee's choice of language. So from the top of my head, I think there was Pahari, Patwari, as it's also called, there's Punjabi, there's Urdu, there's English. And the non-English interviews were translated into English to widen accessibility. But a lot of the transcribing work for the English interviews were done in-house. They were done by us. And I remember it was one of the first, when me and Kadija joined, us one of the first collections that we actually worked on and transcribing them. And I remember as well that being a bit of a language barrier, which made cataloging and transcribing places and names quite difficult. But at that point, it was very important that we had that communication between our archivists and the project coordinator, which meant that we could ask the project coordinator or the volunteers if we could get spellings of names and regions, or even add more contextual footnotes to our indexes, around information around childhood games, cultural childhood games that we don't know of, or political events that seemed important to highlight. Next slide, please. So very quickly, some of the outputs that were a result of this collection. We obviously have the archive. So that's 29 oral history interviews. One of them is a reminiscent session. We have photographs, digital photographs as well from that. We worked together to construct the digital exhibition in Central Library. And from this content, the Trust subsequently produced a printed booklet, which you can see pictured there. So that's also on our website as well, accessible digitally. There was a celebration event at Crescent Radio, and I know there's continued radio play of the interviews from the radio program. And I think there are 2 other oral history projects that are in the works right now, from the radio. I think the last one, they've just had an oral history training with us earlier this year. So there's continued projects in the work as a result of this one collection. Yeah, I think I'm going to hand over to Kadija now.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. So now we're going to move on to talking about the various ways that we share our collections, both digitally and physically. And we're going to be looking at that during the next few slides. There will be screenshots of the websites that will be referenced throughout on the screen. So we will be dropping them in the link in the chat box if you are interested in exploring any of them further. So the first step to sharing our collections is through ensuring our catalogues are actually accessible and are available online. This has been done in various ways. So depending on the user's familiarity with our work and archives, our website would probably be the first place people would look to. So here we have further information on how to access the online catalogue. This then leads users to the University of Manchester's website, which again is a great resource for those new to archives. Specifically, it would be useful for students searching across the university's material, and they may not think or know about the collections that we have available. So the site provides further information on the work that we do and also provides snapshots into some of the collections, either through highlighting themes of some of our key collections or providing a snapshot into the selection of the oral history collections that are available. As this is more of an overview and insight into what we have available, this would then link directly to Spiders. So Spiders is the main way we signal users to view our catalogue. It's an online searchable catalogue for both archives and books that we hold. Again, to aid users, we also have specific themes where users can search collections that relate to either Black History Month, Refugee Week, Manchester Communities, South Asian Heritage Month, and there's also an oral history section. For those who know what they are looking for, they can simply enter the reference number for the collection in the search bar and find it. Users can also add in keywords to aid them in their search. If you are interested in learning more on how to navigate Spiders, there is a detailed guide available on our website. So there's also 2 searchable platforms on the University of Manchester website where some of our material is also available. So first up, we have Luna, where we have a fully digitized collection on the Commission of Racial Equality publication dating from 1976 to 2008. The other way to explore some of our collections is through the University of Manchester library search page, which is linked to our catalogue on Spiders and is mainly useful for students and academics. So for those less familiar with our work, but generally would know about archives, they may be introduced to us by finding us on either the National Archives or the Archives Hub, which are both national searchable databases where we upload collection level information with the intention of increasing our discoverability. This is why it's important to have our collections available on various platforms, as this allows a variety of different users to find the material we have available. So outside of the catalogues and databases, we also use different digital and physical ways to share our collections ourselves. So starting with regularly sharing our collections through the blog section on our website. This sometimes is done by centering our collection on items around a topic or a theme and using the material as examples. This allows readers to delve deeper into the collections and hopefully it sparks them to further seek out the collections and explore it more. So on the screen, you can see some of the titles from previous blogs that have been written. So other ways we share our collections include SoundCloud. Under the collections tab on our website, we also have a link to our SoundCloud page where we have made excerpts from life stories in our extensive oral history collections available to the public. So recordings include memories, opinions, and unique experiences, often omitted from official historical narratives. Next slide, please. So we also share snapshots of our collections via social media. This includes Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, mainly through images of items. However, I've also been exploring creating short videos to allow audiences a different insight into the collections, and it is a new way to present the material. So here is an example of one I did for Mother's Day.
Oh, she's my mini-me. She is my best friend. She is my advisor, personal advisor or personal assistant. She is my all in all. She's my daughter.
Thanks. So I also did one for International Mother Language Day, which you can watch on our Instagram page. The reason why I did this is just to highlight several different collections with the hope that users can see how they can be explored and brought together using a theme, whilst also shedding light on Mother's Day or International Mother Language Day, which people may not have known about and its origins. We've also participated in Explore Your Archive Week in the last 2 years. So this is where archives are encouraged to share material from their collections using a different hashtag each day. This allows us to reach new audiences, but also exchange and learn from other archives. So you can see some of the images on the right-hand side of the screen.
Oh, she's my.
So we also have a digital exhibition space, which is physically located by the entrance of Central Library. We usually receive hundreds of thousands of visitors each year as it's an open public space. So this acts as a shop window to our collections. It raises awareness and invites the public to explore more items within our collections. We hold oral histories and video clips, which people can listen to over their phones. There's also images, and there's also further information on exactly what collection it is and reference number in case people want to go and look at what we hold. When we're running events, we also offer a tour of the space to introduce audiences to the area and the different collections that we hold in there. In our library space, we also have a physical exhibition on the life of Ahmed Iqbal Ullah. And next slide, please. So throughout the year, we also hold numerous events or hold outreach sessions, which sometimes are sparked by the collections that we hold and are then further developed into learning resources or study guides, which are accessible mainly through our website. During these events and sessions, we sometimes also use the corresponding collections based around the event or talk, either through a mini exhibition or a display. Again, just getting our collections in through different ways. We also run regular oral history training sessions with a variety of groups and use our collections as examples of other projects. Then we're going to be looking at how to actually access our collections in person. So there's two main ways to do this. It's either through our library or through the search room. So we do hold a local study section in our library, which contains a range of publications about the histories and experiences of people of global majority heritage in Greater Manchester and the Northwest. These are produced by local organizations, Manchester writers, researchers, and University of Manchester scholars. We also have bound volumes of oral histories available in our library. As a considerable amount of this material is rare, and they would be incredibly difficult to replace, it's only available to access upon request, but users can view these materials in the library by simply asking a member of staff at our inquiry desk. And then the simplest way to explore and access our collections is through booking a space in our search room. The search room allows users to book an appointment and view both physical and digital material, including oral histories. So there are some guidelines in place to using the collections in the search room, such as Of course, the use of no pens, no food, no drink being permitted in the room. This is just simply to protect the valuable collections that we hold. Although there's generally a charge for taking photos of materials, it's usually around £6 per half day. We do have an agreement in place to waive the fee, just to reduce barriers to people accessing our collections. Hopefully this has given you some insight into how we can share our collections and also how you are able to access it. I'll now pass it back to Sonbal.
Thank you. I know we're going to go over just by a few minutes, but I'm just going to very quickly go through our last slide, which is the challenges that we face. I'm sure everyone saw copyright, GDPR, and ethical questions and rolled their eyes a bit, because anyone working in the sector probably comes across the same challenges. So a lot of the challenges that we do come across in our day-to-day work with not just our oral histories, but also our related archive collections comes from copyright, GDPR. But this is mainly due to the nature of the topics and the histories that we collect. So many of our oral histories will include sensitive material and very personal stories, especially when it's around migration and racism and its associated traumas. So one of the ways that we try to mitigate this is by advising heritage project groups to do a sensitivity review of all of their recorded interviews and material. And this is a key part of the oral history training, where we highlight examples of what could fall under these topics, and we provide them templates in order to do the review. And so this could include anything like medical or health related information, religion, sexuality, race, ethnicity, war, violence, political affiliations, or talking about any of these categories regarding another individual without their knowledge. All of this is really important to keep in mind when you're not only recording oral history interviews, but also hoping to archive them and share them further. And so the oral history training also introduces concepts like GDPR and informed consent. And thus interviewees and donors are they're both given the opportunity to put any redactions or closures on their materials for as many years as they require or feel comfortable with. And these closures are all reviewed and appraised by our team internally very regularly. And concurrent to that, which I think most importantly, our donation agreements also include another separate permissions form that outlines the various possible scenarios where the oral histories or the materials could be used in the future. Again, this includes websites, social media, exhibitions, publications, educational resources, research, and use of their name. I think there are a few more that I might be forgetting, but they're the main ones. And so this permissions form, permissions for use form, is signed by all donors, all the interviewees, and all of the copyright holders of any of the material used. So we're very clear on how we are allowed to use the collections. Now this gets a bit complicated in terms of copyright when we have donations that were donated to us before all of these processes and paperwork were put into place, and we like to call them legacy collections, because they could include newspaper articles which we don't hold copyright to, and so we can't use them as freely on social media or on websites as our newer collections, which is really frustrating considering the richness of their content. But this often results us as a team having to risk assess the usage of the items concerned. So for example, if we had an older collection with photographs, then we would feel more comfortable sharing them in a closed educational setting, because it's a more secure environment where we can control who accesses and shares the archives, versus in opposition if we posted those photographs on social media, where we don't have informed consent to post pictures of people's faces in places they don't know where it's going, and it's more difficult to control the reproduction of these images online. And also, where appropriate, we include trigger warnings on any of our blog posts, on our websites, on social media, on our SoundCloud albums, not only to protect those the interviewees or the people concerned in the archive, but also in order to protect our audiences, where we recognize there is a lot of shared trauma, and we have to sort of balance that, taking the well-being of our audiences and our interviewees. And a final note on challenges, which I want to finish the presentation on, is that we recognize that we're constantly changing the way that we do things to better fit the requirements of the communities that we work with. And a common challenge that most of our team feel recently is that we don't have a community voice present when we're making risk assessments when it comes to copyright and usage for older collections. It may be because we don't, because it's been so long, we might not have contact with the original donors, or they may have passed, which we're finding more frequently, unfortunately, and finding next of kin is difficult. So hopefully in the future, it's something that we can work collectively on. And I want to end the presentation by saying thank you so much for listening, and yeah, happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Thank you.
Juanita, you're on mute.
There was me thinking I had unmuted. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you very much, Sonal, Kadija, and Claire, for a really fascinating insight. I think, I mean, I visited the centre before, but I didn't realise that you disseminated what you do so widely. But I'd like to invite Jennie now. Jennie, as the discussant, would you like to, if you take yourself off mute and...
Sure, yeah. Thank you for the presentation. It was really nice to see where things have been going in the last few years since I've left the Education Trust. I was really, I'm really struck by how succinct you are now at presenting some really complicated issues that we grappled with when I worked there, to do with who the centre belongs to and how it operates, and what the different parts, both the centre and the Education Trust, do. So I think that was a really succinct summary that has obviously been honed and sounds really good. I also was interested, obviously I was involved in research, the audit that identified gaps in local collections, and then applied for funding to bring about change and do development work to address those issues. And I was interested in how many collections in the end were processed as part of that. Perhaps you could talk a bit more about the breadth of that project, how many collections came in as a result of that funding. And perhaps I was also interested in the fact that the voice of the community is present throughout the whole process, from shaping the content of the project right through to the delivery of the project, and how that project is then archived and shared. Again, I was involved in testing a lot of that methodology, but it was really early days, and I think it looks like you've become hugely professional in how that is now done on the ground, how that happens on the ground. So it'd be interesting to find out a bit more about how the communities you work with have responded to that process, and felt as they've been asked questions about things that they probably didn't anticipate at the beginning of the process when they were collecting oral histories. They didn't, when it comes to archiving, I don't think many people understand what's involved in that, and perhaps didn't expect to be involved in that process. So it'd be good to hear a bit more about that, perhaps. You mentioned Kashmiri Lives, which I remember Fahim from Kashmiri Lives walking into the library with his family tree on a piece of paper and talking about this vague idea for a project that was going to have 50 people involved in it. And we had a chat about why he'd picked the number 50 and how we could help shape that project. So it's really nice to see that as an official archive now being disseminated. But I was interested again in terms of the language in that project and other projects. You mentioned that there were a lot of different dialects. What does that mean in terms of access and in terms of documentation and participation of the people involved as well? So that would be something I'd like to hear more about. Again, Kadija, I've already touched on this, but the amount of work you're doing to share the collections is fascinating. I mean, I know when I worked for the organisation, we were just beginning to look at a lot of the ethics of archiving and disseminating information, and it kind of shut down some of the sharing possibilities. So I think a lot of the access issues around people having to come to the centre. I've talked to Juanita about this as well, about people having to physically come into the centre to look at material or listen to material. And there are loads of really good reasons why that happens, because obviously of the sensitivity of the material, like Sonbal mentioned, and maintaining some sense of control over the risks involved in sharing that widely. But Kadija, it sounds like you've found loads of ways of getting around that and doing what you can with what is available. And I'm just wondering what impact that's had in terms of audiences and the types of audiences you've reached, because you've been consciously sharing it with a much broader audience and a wider audience. And I'm also interested in the community response to that, because a lot of communities are initially collecting for themselves and their own sense of identity, and to pass on to future generations within that community. And I think thinking about all the people that might be interested in your project after it's finished is a bit mind-blowing. But a great additional benefit to archiving. So they were some of the questions that I thought of while I was listening to your presentation. And also my last reflection was around due diligence as well, with some of the older archives that you hold. You know, again, that was something early days that we were thinking about exploring when Drew was the digital officer, but I'm interested in what steps you are taking to try and address due diligence with some of those older collections, so you can get some of that out as well, because some of that content is really rich and really rare and would be absolutely brilliant to make available more publicly.
Thank you so much for that positive reaction, Jenny. I think I may be able to answer a few of the earlier points that you brought up. I think the first interesting point I think that you discussed was the audit that was taken obviously at the beginning of coming in from the cold. I think it was 2018, 2017, which identified all those gaps within collections. And to sort of compare that to sort of the end product of coming in from the cold, and how much progress has been made in comparison to that, against that aim. And I think last year I've just managed to pull up the evaluation that we as a team made last year in 2022. And in terms of project development, we had 41 projects that were provided with support, ranging from further conversations to discuss ideas, to advice on project scope, activity planning, equipment training, archiving, sharing information, proofreading application, and budgets. And on top of that, in terms of project delivery, there were 31 projects that were provided with the support, ranging from training to advice and facilitation, and archiving and documentation. And that is a reflection of the work that we have done. And thinking about it now, not taking into consideration the work that my colleagues are doing in terms of sector research and consultancy work as well, and how much that, as part of coming in from the cold, has pushed visibility in a different way, and how many more projects that has helped. So in terms of figures, that's what I've been able to get to you. And the second point I think that you mentioned was the community's response to the process, and the coming in from the cold process of work that I explained earlier. And it is quite interesting actually when you're, as you mentioned with Fahim at Kashmiri Lives, when he came in, he sort of had these huge plans of 50 names, and 29 oral histories, even from your experience, is a lot as an oral history project. And I think a lot of the groups that we work with who coming for the oral history training, especially in part 2, where we're like, oh, how many interviews have you done? And you know, they will have figures of, we want to do 50 interviews, and they're a group of 5. And it's, you know, you have to sort of have that understanding that it's very time consuming, especially considering if you're going to deposit an archive with us, we need documentation around it, you know, the indexing, the transcribing, all the, you know, sensitivity reviews. It's very time consuming. So having to lower that expectation, which is in a way heartbreaking, but also, you know, helpful to that group. And there's always that, you know, archiving reality as opposed to your project and how far and how big ideas for projects are. I'm sure if you have conversations with Layla, our community archivist, and Hafsa, who's our community producer, who are at the front line of this interaction, they will tell you that the process of it is constantly changing, as in, like I mentioned in the presentation, there will be projects who will have their project outlines basically finished, and then they will come to us later on. But it is, as you said, that process from beginning to end, where you will see projects changing so much and having to downsize, I think, sometimes in order to get a really high quality oral history and archive sometimes at the end of the day. And I think a lot of the groups do understand this when we talk through the nitty-gritty of oral history projects. I think, Kadija, you might have more to say about I think the point that Jenny mentioned about accessible audiences.
Yeah, definitely. So Jenny, you would definitely know like how difficult it actually is to share these collections, just because of the many barriers that are in the way. So the main issue that we had was the permission forms. So dating from the older collections, I think Sonbal touched upon it, is there was no section for social media. That wasn't used at that time when we got those permission forms in. So going back now, it is actually really difficult getting back in contact with those people. But the collections that we do have available now, majority do allow the use of social media and sharing on our website, which is great for the work that I do. But for the ones that don't, it does make it difficult on what I can actually share. But the main way that I've kind of got around it is by sharing it in different ways. So if I share an image, maybe a couple months ago, I shared one image and then I reuse it in a different way. Maybe I use an audio clip, or I use it as a compilation of what I showed you before in the presentation. So just sharing the material, the same material that you have, but in different ways, can actually make an impact. And if you're working with a small collection that you are able to share, it does really make a big difference. And I think you mentioned about what the community response has been. I think they generally have been interested. As I mentioned in my section of the presentation, when we have talks or we have events, I always make sure to offer a tour of the exhibition space. A lot of people surprisingly have been in the library, but they haven't actually accessed that space and they didn't know that it was available. So when I show them, oh, we have Kashmiri Lives here, we have Gardens of Babylon here. These are different collections talking about how people campaign in different ways. They are actually generally interested. And then when we share it on social media as well, or we share blogs on the website, I think they're just really excited to see people who look like them, who have similar stories of people as themselves, or maybe people in their families. It just resonates with them. And for us now, it may seem like the norm, but in general practice of museums and archives, people don't see themselves reflected from a point of view from their stories being told in their own languages, in the way that they want to, and not being told to them. It's rather, it's for them and with them. So again, like just to expand on that, the main one of my main goals is not just to share collections for the sake of just sharing them and populating our different social media web pages, but it's making sure that it's done with intention. What is the intention behind it? Why am I doing this? And also ensuring that the captions are really detailed. They explain what the item is, how people can go back to it, what the reference number is. I've recently worked with the collections team on creating a reference document so that once we do share things either on our website or beyond, or people are referencing our material, it is being referenced correctly. So every single time our material is shared, people can come back to our material and find exactly what they need, rather than it being dispersed in different ways. And then also we are going back into the National Archives and the Archives Hub with material that may have been referenced slightly different and going back. So again, it's just about making sure everything is done in a consistent manner. People can come back in and view our material. They know how to access it. And there's different ways in which we share collections. So maybe if you're not a person who uses social media a lot, you can see it on our website. If you don't use our website and you like to be in person, you'll view it in person. So hopefully it sparks some interest. But yeah, I think that was mainly it.
No, I was going to just add there that just what you were saying, the end of what you were saying very much relates to Jenny's question around audience engagement and how, you know, how we deal with that and how that's changed. I mean, I think, Jenny, as you'll appreciate, we've always had quite a diverse, in many different ways, set of groups and individuals who are interested in our work and want to learn more. But as Kadija says, by providing snapshots at the very least of collections on social media and elsewhere, it really does enable us to kind of reach out more. And I think some of this was in some ways necessarily accelerated by COVID, when we all stayed at home, we switched to online. And I think that the various technological developments that have taken place, and also people's expectations of availability as well, has changed with that. So by having the different platforms, the website, the blog, Instagram and so on, it does enable us to further the reach for, if someone uses this platform or not that platform, and having things like SoundCloud, but as well as having the physical space in Central Library, which, we already said is just such a great location. It's central, it's easy to get to, people recognize it. They don't always explore it. That is something, that we, as Kadija says, we encourage and offer. But it does give us, a physical presence in the city as well. So people can, work with us and then perhaps come and see, the exhibition that relates to the work they've been doing, for example.